Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Governor Rauner is joined by Senate and House Republicans as they denounce what they say is the Democrats' refusal to compromise on a budget, and in the case of Speaker Madigan, a desire to see a budget crisis. Following that, in about 40 minutes from now, Senate Majority Leader John Cullerton describes the Democrats' frustrations when dealing with the Republicans and Governor over a budget compromise. Then in about 1 hour from now, we attend a press conference where the head of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce is joined by representatives of the transportation industry as they discuss the negative effects the budget impasse has had on Illinois' transportation infrastructure. And finally, in about 1 hour and 30 minutes from now, we talk to Darren Root, the superintendent of the Auburn School District, and Mike Tomlinson, a consultant for the Champaign and Ford County School Districts, about Senate Bill 100, which would establish specific guidelines for school discipline. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Linda Brookhart, Executive Director of the State Universities Annuitants Association. Founded in 1971, the State Universities Annuitants Association is the only advocacy organization focusing solely on pension and health care benefits for the participants and beneficiaries within the state university's retirement system. We advocate for both active workers as well as retirees. The number of individuals are well over 200,000. As an association, we work hard to keep our members informed of possible changes in the law that may impact their pensions, their health care, and their general well-being. There is no other association working to keep individuals informed on issues that matter. This is the one reason we're also proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel. Its focus is to keep all Illinoisans informed of the issues that affect them, whether in state government or of significant changes in the private sector. The Illinois Channel's in-depth, unedited coverage of legislative events, policy discussions, interviews with lawmakers, university presidents, and business leaders keep you informed on the issues that affect your life and the future of Illinois. I'm Linda Brookhart with the State Universities Annuitants Association. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, Governor Rauner is joined by Senate and House Republicans as they denounce what they say is the Democrats' refusal to compromise on a budget, and in the case of Speaker Madigan, a desire to see a budget crisis. This runs about 35 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So here we are in the state capitol on Wednesday. No speaker, no supermajority, no General Assembly in session. We're in a crisis. We don't have a state budget. Our schools are being threatened with not having the funds to open. Our government operations are at risk of a crisis, lack of cash availability to fund key vendors and key suppliers, and no General Assembly. Speaker Madigan has reneged on his commitment to have the General Assembly meet at least every Wednesday. They're not here. Frankly, meeting every Wednesday is not enough. They should be here virtually every day of the week. I'm here working every day. They should be here working. We should get this resolved. And the Speaker has slow-walked, slow-rolled the working groups. They were making progress for months. We were close to an agreement. Reform-minded Democrats with Republicans to come to a grand bargain where we could have a balanced budget for the first time in forever and reforms to grow jobs, grow our economy, grow family incomes, protect property taxpayers, reform our pension system to make it constitutionally fair and affordable. The Speaker Madigan saw we were getting close to reforms, put his thumb on the process several weeks ago, and they've been basically slow-walked ever since. And now the Speaker is using the working groups as an excuse not to have the General Assembly do its job. He's slowed them down and then basically saying, oh, the working groups are still talking, so the General Assembly will work if and when the working groups come to a result, while he's quietly slowed it down and made sure that they're not coming to resolution. Speaker Madigan and his supermajority are clearly working to create a crisis, clearly putting stress in the system, threatening our schools, and threatening our essential government services, our human services, our correction system, our core government operations, using it as leverage to force a bailout of Chicago public schools and the city of Chicago, and to force a major tax hike after the general election in November, force a tax hike without reforms. The Speaker's been pretty darn clear he does not want reforms. We will continue to negotiate in good faith with his reform-minded caucus members. There are Democrats who know that the Speaker is wrong. We're hoping that enough of them come together to stand up to him at some point before too long. We will continue to negotiate with them in good faith to get compromises. And we're willing to compromise on virtually everything. But what we can't do is nothing other than have unbalanced budgets with huge tax hikes to try to cover them up. That will not solve our problems. Our problems are too big, too intense. That will not solve anything. So, in the spirit of good faith compromise, we'll continue to negotiate with reform-minded Democrats to come to a solution. In the meantime, our schools should not be held hostage, and our government operations should not be held up to try to create a crisis. I think most of you in this room know that the Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, has tried to create a crisis. She has not succeeded yet, but she's been working in the courts to try to stop our hardworking state employees from getting paid through the courts. She has not succeeded in that yet, but she's been working that's another attempt that's been going on to try to create a crisis, to create leverage for Chicago bailout and a tax hike without reforms. That's what that's about. We've got a solution. There is a solution here, and this is what we need your viewers and your listeners to understand. There is a solution here right now. We've got bills in the General Assembly introduced. One of the spokespeople for Speaker Madigan's Democrats said yesterday there's no bills to vote on. That is false. There are bills to vote on. We've got a bill to fully fund our schools, the full foundation level, with a hold harmless for any school district that gets less money under Speaker Madigan's funding formula. Remember, the current funding formula that's been in place since 2003 was put in place by Speaker Madigan, President Emil Jones, and Governor Blagojevich. This has been in place for a long time. Speaker Madigan has not wanted to change the funding formula that he put in place. I'm willing to make sure that even with his funding formula that's currently in place, no school district gets less money, including Chicago. Even though Chicago's enrollment has declined, we'll hold it harmless, so Chicago will get at least as much money this year as last year. There is a school funding bill that we've introduced. It should be voted on, so our schools can open on time, our teachers and our principals can have the confidence that they're going to get the support they deserve. Because while the budget negotiations continue, schools should not be put at risk. Our students are too important. Our teachers are too important. We also have a solution for our government operations and our essential human services that need to be funded. And I have not connected any negotiations about reforms to it. It's just purely a stopgap budget bill to get us through January. No reforms with it, no other negotiations needed. It's a stopgap budget bill to fund essential human services, correction services, government operations to get us through January, which is what President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan have indicated in our discussions, that's when after the general election has been, when they'll be willing to pick up serious negotiations again and maybe take some real votes on reforms and a balanced budget. So we have solutions. They need to get passed. They should be passed now. We should not have a crisis created by the supermajority Democrats. They should be here today voting on those two bills. Those two bills should pass. With that, I'm going to turn the podium over to some of our other speakers, and then I'll come back with you so we can do Q&A. I'd like to turn the podium over now to Secretary of Education Beth Purvis.
Thank you, Governor. I am here just to review the facts related to HB 6583, SB 3434, which is a bill that is sitting in both houses of the General Assembly that would ensure that our schools open on time and that students, teachers, parents, and the communities know that summer school will go forward and that we will be able to open schools fully funded for next year. What this bill does is, first, it ends proration. Since 2009, proration has cost Illinois public school districts more than $3.8 billion. At the same time, they have been forced to deal with over 140 unfunded mandates. By increasing the GSA by approximately $55 million, we will end proration. Although the distribution of the GSA occurs via the current formula, which you all know just depends on district enrollment, percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and local available resources, this bill also adds an additional $105 million to make sure that no school loses funding from FY16 to FY17. For example, the Chicago Public Schools, which, because it has seen a decrease in enrollment, a decrease in the percentage of students who live in poverty, and an increase in local available resources, they would not, under the current formula, they would lose $74 million. With $105 million in hold harmless, that would not occur. This bill also adds approximately $8 million in line items, including money for advanced placement classes, money for after-school matters, which are after-school program in the city of Chicago, money for agricultural education, money for arts and foreign language education, money to support the lowest performing schools in the state, money for national board certified teachers, and money for Teach for America. In addition, it increases early childhood funding by $75 million, which will do two things. It will ensure that an additional 1,000 full-day child care seats are available in the fall, and it will ensure that we meet the obligations of a federal grant for early childhood. Again, the implications of this bill passing mean that all of our pre-K through 12 schools will open on time and funded in the fall. And if it passes immediately, it will help support those summer programming that are important in so many parts of the state. Again, the increase in early childhood will mean there are over 1,000 more early childhood seats. Every district will receive the same funding that it received last year. This bill uses revenue that has already been identified, meaning that that this funding, which will be the largest pre-K-12 funding in Illinois history, is also fiscally responsible. And we also want to say very clearly, this does not mean we do not believe that there is a need for a new pre-K through 12 funding formula. There's been significant progress in the last few months towards developing a more equitable and adequate formula, but we're not there yet. So this bill prioritizes getting schools open immediately instead of waiting for that work to be completed. But alongside the passage of this bill, the governor and his staff pledged to work with the General Assembly to continue work on a funding formula that could be in place as early as fiscal year 18. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Jason Barrickman, State Senator, 53rd District from Bloomington. You know, it's disappointing that the legislature is not convening when you consider that today we're all aware of the most pressing issue facing the people of the state of Illinois, that being whether or not our schools are going to open this fall. Talk to any teacher, talk to any student or parent, and they'll tell you that there is real concern about whether or not their schools are going to open this fall, and if they do open, whether they're going to have a full 5-day school week, the classes that are going to be offered, and the like. And so this is an imminent issue. It's pressing, and we in the legislature need to be here working to solve this issue. Now, in solving it, by the way, and making sure our schools open this fall. Now, we can solve this issue overnight. The legislation, the governor and Secretary Purvis has talked about, the legislation is filed. You know, we've got budget bills that, if adopted, would guarantee that our schools open this fall. You might ask, what's holding that up? And I ask that question of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, rank and file Democrats who are at home in their districts, I think today need to answer to the people they represent. When they're asked, why aren't they supporting the budget bills that guarantees our schools open this fall. There's no good answer. I don't know what they're holding out for. These bills are clean. There's nothing attached to them. Again, all they do is guarantee that our schools open this fall. There's no reason why rank-and-file Democrats can't vote for these bills. The only reason I think they're not voting for them is because Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton won't call those bills for a vote. If they're called for a vote, I think they pass. I think we create predictability for our educational system, and we move forward. Now, some Democrats, primarily President Cullerton, but some Democrats, point to their opposition to school funding because they want to insert to a discussion of whether our schools open the notion of parity. And they certainly talk about, or they limit their discussions of parity to their view of where the system doesn't favor their school system. So I think it's fair to have a discussion about parity. And in fact, I'd challenge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. If we want to talk about parity, I'm ready to talk about it, but let's talk about parity for the entire educational system and not just parity for one system. Now, what do I mean by that? Today, the Chicago public school system is treated differently than every other school district in the state. President Cullerton likes to talk about pension parity, but you never hear from President Cullerton any discussion about all those other special deals that Chicago gets that every other school district doesn't. Unlike every other school district in this state, Chicago gets to use third-party contractors, which saves Chicago taxpayers money. Chicago gets to determine their class sizes, their staffing levels, their calendars. They get to use technology that's all these decisions are given to Chicago that other school districts don't have. What else? Chicago's given budget flexibility. They get to make decisions on staffing based on their current financial condition in the days before their school year. Every other school district, the RIF process that many of us, especially downstate, are aware of, that RIF process that dictates to school districts that they must notify their personnel, their employees, of staffing levels in April, that process doesn't apply to Chicago Public Schools. What else? We've talked at length about the fact that Chicago Public Schools does not have parity with the rest of the state. They have the Chicago Block Grant. The Block Grant, which guarantees certain percentages of statewide funding for mandated categoricals to one school district. Now, if we're going to have this discussion of parity, I think we ought to have it on all the issues of parity that affect all of our schools in all regions of the state, whether it be Chicago, suburbs, or downstate. It's important to note, when I talk about all these differences, the special deals that Chicago gets, those deals were given under Democratic-controlled legislatures. Many of these benefits were given at a time when, think of who the proponents were to these things. The Chicago Teachers Union supported many of these measures that I just spoke to. The City of Chicago supported them. IFT, AFSCME, SEIU. Many of the measures that I just put forward as issues of parity passed both chambers with a unanimous vote. Today, then Senator Barack Obama was co-sponsor to some of these measures. So again, if we want to talk about parity, let's talk about parity for the entire system. But as we do that, and I'm glad to have that discussion. I hope we continue our work in the working groups. I'm glad to have those discussions. But as we do that, that still gives no excuse for doing what should be done today. Guarantee that our schools open this fall, remove all the doubt, and pass a clean school funding bill like the one that we've put forward in the legislature today. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Representative Ron Sandak.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ron Sandak. I'm the state representative from the 81st. My friend and colleague Jason, I think, more than adequately addressed some of the tension that occurs regularly in the General Assembly and some of the conflation that's occurred with respect to whether there's a deal to be made and whether it makes sense to have the General Assembly in session. Let me be clear. I was disappointed with the Speaker's decision not to have us in full session. There is work the General Assembly must do. There are two bills that we should have voted on last week, that we should have voted on today, and we should vote on tomorrow or the next day whenever we reconvene. There is a stopgap budget that gets us through 2017 or to 2017. And importantly, you've heard it from the previous speakers, there is a K through 12 budget bill that funds schools and absolutely harms no school district at all that we can vote on tomorrow, and we should be voting on tomorrow. I'm here today because I'm part of the working group assemblage of both Democrats and Republicans, and I want to report that in each and every endeavor we've had tremendous progress. We've had professional collegiality across the aisle, and we're making gains. Despite, frankly, Speaker Madigan's attempts about 2 weeks ago to slow walk the process and shut it down, we're chugging along. But we should have every member of the General Assembly in Springfield doing the people's business, which is passing two bills. Two bills that take the pressure off the schools so that families know their kids can go to school. I suspect there are a number of school districts that do not have the financial wherewithal to open in August and September, let alone stay open without major cuts as we stand here right now. There are some school districts that are fine, and that's unfortunate that there's this disparity. And that's where the conflation occurs. I think the Speaker and the Senate President are wrongfully combining school equity and funding with a current budget to get people to school, kids to school, this, for summer school and for the fall. And that's unfortunate as well. Let me just say this, because I think it's been already said, but I'll reiterate it. There is no real good reason why we're not in session. There is no good reason why we're not attending to the pending catastrophe that I contend the Speaker and Senate President wish to have occur. There's no good reason for it. There is no justifiable reason for us not being here and working towards a budget solution and a K through 12 funding solution. They are attainable. The Republicans have had, both in the Senate and the House, bills from this governor and this administration that would take care of the problem. They have been deliberately ignored for a reason, and that's a political reason, and that, unfortunately, is no good. Let me just say one more thing. I pledge to continue to show up every time I can for working group sessions or in full session to work with anybody to get a sensible deal done for the people of Illinois. But in any endeavor, that requires reform. We find ourselves at this junction for a reason, doing the same thing over and over again. Tax, spending, borrowing, and spending beyond our means has gotten us to this critical financial juncture. We must have reform. Every sensible Democrat, and there are plenty, know that in their heart of hearts, that we cannot do the same thing over and over. We're at this juncture because of bad decisions in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. We now need good-hearted, good-souled, well-intentioned legislators to step up, attend, participate, and take votes that matter for the people of Illinois. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you, Mr. Representative. All right, I'll open it up to questions.
When are you going to call a special session?
Well, in my conversations with the Speaker and as our staffs have talked, the Speaker has been clear. He doesn't want to take votes on any of the bills we've introduced. He doesn't want to take votes. He just wants to have the working groups slow walked. And what we would end up doing is wasting time. I'm not into wasting time. If the Speaker would send any signal at all that he's ready to take votes, we should have them here. Right now, he's not indicating that at all.
Governor, you said that Democrats are corrupt because they're trying to leverage crisis for a tax increase. But when you unveiled your turnaround agenda more than a year ago, you said you were going to leverage crisis. Crisis creates opportunity for reforms, is what you said. What makes it okay for you to do that and not for Democrats?
I didn't create this crisis. I did not create this crisis. This was created by Speaker Madigan's supermajority. They created it in the past on their taxing and spending bills. They're creating it now. I'm trying to find a solution to the crisis. That's the major difference.
I believe there's a working group that's starting over at Stratton, like any minute now, or just starting the budget group. Would you stop by, or do you know that's going on today? Does this blow that up by talking about this, or what?
No, it doesn't blow it up at all. The working groups are meeting on various topics fairly frequently.
And Governor Edgar, again, yesterday said that, I think in a forum in Chicago, that the real problem, what's caused this crisis, is that your turnaround agenda, you won't agree to a budget without getting those reforms. He said it before. you said something like, well, he's part of the problem. You want to expand on that? Or why is he wrong when this popular Republican governor says that your push for reform and the tax coming off without you agreeing to it coming back to even where it was is the problem?
Again, I don't want to comment on decisions in the past.
Go ahead.
Decisions in the past that created our current crisis.
Like what?
Can I jump in?
Well,
Let me jump in for a second, because, well, hold on, because I do it on the floor, and I want to address something, because he's in a different space than I am.
Yeah, but he's running the state.
He is the chief executive officer of the state, and he is one of three parts of a tri-level branch of governing, which is co-equal. Couple things. One, I respect Governor Edgar a lot. I was part of the Edgar Fellows. But to be fair, his tenure and stance is distinctly different than the position we find ourselves in right now. To abandon reform would be the equivalent of doing what's been done in the past, taxing and spending.
Unless you get back to 5% where you were, and then you wouldn't have
No,
this crisis.
that's bad math, Bernie, because the math still doesn't work out. Okay. It does not work out, and that's still not reforming the state. Anyone that really believes we're in this crisis because of some vacuum, I think is not looking back at the past. Look, tax and spend, some bad pension decisions, including the ramp, have gotten us to this spot. I don't want to attribute blame. I want to move forward. And while I respect the governor, I don't think he's helping out. Governor Edgar is helping out with some of the commentary. The place we find ourselves right now is one where we must have reform. Any thoughtful, diligent person that looks at this situation will come to that same conclusion. In the absence of reform, we get nowhere. Now, one more point. The two temporary bills, the stopgap bill and the K-12 bill, have no turnaround or reform mechanisms in it. So this, again, conflation of issues, if the Democrats really hate those things, and frankly, most of them do not, they'd vote on those bills right now because they end the K-12 crisis and they get us through January on a budget with no new spending, no new taxes, totally fundable. That's something I'm afraid Governor Edgar and others have not emphasized.
Governor, you are here talking about the need to open schools in the fall. I get it. It is extremely important. Why is that, however, more important than the social services stopgap that you haven't acted on, that's been on your desk for a month? Or frankly, tell somebody that's waiting, that can't get drug treatment, that was sexually assaulted and doesn't have any line to call because that's shut down. Why are schools more important than all of those needs?
Human services funding is critically important. That's why we have introduced our stopgap budget bill. Human services are funded. Government operations are funded. Essential services are funded. That's why our stopgap is there. That's why we need to get that stopgap bill passed right now.
Why not act on the bill that's on your desk right now?
That Republicans also supported that bill.
It does not have essential services in it. It is incomplete and will still, this is what I need you to understand, will still create a crisis. That bill is designed to still create a government operations crisis. That's what the key distinction that you're missing. Yes?
Governor, you recently called some schools in Chicago prisons. What schools were you referring to?
I have worked for decades to try to improve Chicago public schools. I care very deeply about the children of Chicago and the teachers of Chicago. The schools, too many of the schools are depressing places.
Specific names or just?
What we need to do is fundamentally change our system. It's broken. Chicago public schools have been mismanaged for decades, and they really haven't had a lack of money. They have misspent their money terribly. Cronyism, conflicts of interest, bloated bureaucracy, a lot of patronage. The schools were used as a political operation as much or more as an education system. And that's horrible for the teachers there and horrible for the students there. My wife and I have invested time and resources there to a degree that I don't know who else has done as much as we have, and we're proud of it. I care very deeply about Chicago public schools. As I mentioned the other day, in my tours and visits and working in the schools, I have cried. It's brought tears to my eyes. When you go into some of the schools, some are fine, some are good, but too many of them are not, and it's not fair to the students. And there's so much rhetoric right now. There's all this mudslinging, you know, and I'm being accused of this or that. Personal attacks. You can tell the election season has started. This personal attack stuff is just, it's pretty irrelevant. What we've got to focus on is helping all schools. We've got to make sure they open, they are funded, and that even under the current funding formula that Speaker Madigan and the Democrats put in place, that no district gets less. That's why we've got to hold harmless. So even Chicago, even though they've got thousands fewer students and have been declining for years for all kinds of reasons, we can hold Chicago harmless and get them the same amount of money as last year. It's fair, it's affordable, it's funded, and we should pass our education funding bill now, and we should pass our stopgap human services and government operations bill now.
Governor, talk about those bills that you're pushing for 2 weeks now. They're fully funded. They don't spend more than we take in. But that's not true, because they rely on the court orders and consent decrees continuing, which are spending at levels of revenue we no longer have. So how, after a year and a half of pushing for spending only what we take in and, you know, saying we're going to change things, isn't a stopgap budget from now until January just more of the same?
It's not my first choice, but we can't have the government shut down. That's unfair to the people of the state. The supermajority Democrats have not been willing to do any reforms at all, none. And when we got close to doing reforms, because there were good-hearted, reform-minded Democrats there who were there for the right reasons, and they know that our reforms are reasonable. We were getting there, and the Speaker basically pulled the plug on the process, really slowed it down. And then when we were up in arms about it, he's let it slow rock since, so he can sort of say, well, it's still happening. But it's been slowed down.
Will reforms be enough, though, in the end, if we eventually get everything that you want, to pay off this bill backlog that has grown?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Good for you. I should get that question every day. The answer is emphatically yes. Illinois has the hardest working people in America. We've got the best location of any state in America, the best agriculture, so the best infrastructure, the capital, the heart of America, in the city of Chicago. We can and should be kicking tails. And when we get our reforms, the reason we're advocating for our reforms is because we can get more jobs, higher family incomes, property tax protection, getting some of the conflicts of interest and things out of the government. We can do this. That's what this is about. I'm so glad you asked the question. And within a couple of years, we can be paying down our debts, and we can grow our way out of these problems. You know, and if we don't do the reforms, anybody who would argue we should do a budget, meaning when they say that, they mean raise taxes. They don't want to say that, but when they say do a budget, that means raise taxes. Anybody who thinks doing a tax hike with no reforms, and also what's created a lot of the problem, is kick the can on pension payments. It's just happened in Chicago again, good grief. And we've done it in Illinois. Anybody who thinks that not paying pensions, borrowing from the future to fund current operations, think that's a solution to anything is just woefully mistaken. And we've got to change. And here's the exciting thing. For example, Chicago needs more good-paying middle-class jobs, not just minimum wage jobs. Chicago needs it desperately. Chicago in the last 15 years has lost half their manufacturing jobs. It's devastating. Every manufacturing job pays well. It's not minimum wage. Manufacturing is not minimum wage. And every manufacturing job creates another 4 to 5 jobs around it. Chicago is not competitive. Chicago used to be the heart of manufacturing in America. All of our reforms help Chicago bring manufacturing firms back. And if we grow, we can pay down our debts, we can pay off our pensions, and we can get higher family incomes. That's exactly what we're arguing.
Governor, one thing you said, Governor.
Just a second. Yes.
Governor Rauner, doesn't Edgar have a point about the tone? He said about the tone of civility. You know, you talked about personal attacks earlier, but yesterday you called the Senate President crooked.
The tone has been rough for 18 months. And part of the challenge is change is hard. And there's a real reluctance to change. And I agree that the tone should be better. Hopefully we'll get it better. You've heard some pretty outrageous things said coming. You know, it's a distraction. And all of us, I think, hopefully are adults. All of us are in office to do a job. and what we should focus on. Political spin and attacks and verbal sparring, that's all lovely. It's pretty irrelevant. It's pretty irrelevant. People should be able to move it aside. I can certainly move it aside. I've been, you know,
you're doing plenty of it. It's going both ways, Governor.
That's right.
You've been to these towns in the whole month of June, vilifying the people you're supposed to be negotiating with, bidding downstate against Chicago. What does it accomplish when our chief executive is tearing down the other party and alienating the biggest city in our state?
Here's the issue. Our supermajority party has created the crisis that we're in. They refuse to change. They want to continue the crisis. And they're on let's be clear, the reason I'm feisty, and I'm a feisty guy, and I'm a volunteer, I'm doing this because I love Illinois, and I want jobs, and I want value for taxpayers, and I want properly funded schools, and I want to get rid of the corruption in our system. And anybody who wants to criticize me for criticizing corruption, go for it. You know what? We have a corrupt government. We have conflicts of interest in our government. That's a fact. Okay? So let's, you know what? And we can all have rhetoric, but I'm going to fight. I will always fight to change the system. Our system is broken. We've been going down the wrong road for years. Speaker Madigan has controlled it. I will say it every day. It's a fact. And anybody who says, well, we can't work together because you were mean to me yesterday. Oh, come on. Grow up. Calm down.
On the radio in Springfield,
Thank you.
and you didn't like regionalism. And you didn't like regionalism. This is exactly
Wait, calm down. Come on.
I mean, you told
Stay calm.
Macedonia, I hated when people pit one part of the state against another. Then you go to downstate communities and say Chicago wants your money.
The supermajority Democrats are focused on two things, and this is the reason I'm fighting. We got to be clear. Everybody needs to be clear. The supermajority Democrats are focused on two things: bailing out the city of Chicago, which has been corrupt and mismanaged and financially bereft for years, and forcing a tax hike without reforms. That's the two things they're focused on. It's a fact. That's what they're trying to do. I'm fighting against that. I have to fight against that, and I do it working for every family. I work for every family in Springfield. I work for every family in Carbondale. I work for every family in Chicago. And I want to put more money into Chicago public schools. I want to put more money into all schools as part of a balanced budget where we have economic growth to fund more money for our schools. That's what our reform is about. And to get through this crisis, to get through all the mudslinging, and we're in an election mode now. If we were adults, we would say, let's put the election's going to happen, and the flinging, that's going to happen. But we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can have electioneering and, flinging, fine, whatever, it's irrelevant. It really is irrelevant. Let's do our jobs. Let's be here. Let's negotiate a bill to get our schools open. Let's negotiate a bill to fund our human services and our central government operations. And then, as the mudflinging goes on, and it's going to continue, this is politics, and this ain't tiddlywinks here in Illinois politics, let's get reforms to grow our economy. Because if we're growing, thanks to Jordan's question, if we grow, our family incomes will go up. We'll pay down our bills. And I've said, I don't know how much it's been quoted, if we had just grown at the nation's average the last 15 years, just average growth, we wouldn't have a deficit today. We wouldn't have needed the 2011 income tax hike. We wouldn't have any unpaid bills today, and we'd have billions more in the state treasury for our schools and our human services. Economic growth is the key. That's what our reforms are about. And anybody who wants to argue and criticize, say, just do a budget with a tax hike in it, we'll fix it, won't fix it. Our debt's too big and more companies will leave. And anybody who says, well, deferring pension payments, like just happened in Chicago, will solve anything, won't solve the problem. And in fact, it'll make it worse in the long run, and employers will see that, and they won't come. Thanks very much, everybody.
Next from Chicago, Senate Majority Leader John Cullerton describes the Democrats' frustrations when dealing with the Republicans and governor over a budget compromise. This runs about 20 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. The last time I talked to reporters, it was approaching midnight on May 31st, and while it was clear that we were going to adjourn without a state budget, I was optimistic. I still see the governor's movement on an emergency budget as a tremendous step forward. And the very next day, June 1st, staff key staff for the caucuses and the governor's office had a conference call to lay out some guidelines for working forward. The working groups have continued to meet. In fact, they just ended a meeting right now, a few minutes ago, on the same floor of this building. I should point out that the two Republican budget bills that were filed on the last day of session are the basis for those ongoing negotiations. And I had hoped that we would have had a deal on those proposals that the governor had signed off on by now. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. But I remain optimistic that real progress is being made in these working groups from the reports I've been getting. Now, before I go any further, I think I may need to set the record straight on something. Back in November of 2014, you may recall election night, I never did talk to Bruce Rauner. As you may recall, that phone call didn't come through. So I never officially and formally congratulated him for winning that night. I'd like to do that right now, correct that oversight. Congratulations on your winning the 2014 governor's race. I want to express how much I look forward to working with you and find bipartisan agreement to solve the state's problems. And of course, I'm saying this in the hopes that the governor, 18 months into his term of office, will finally stop campaigning and start managing the state he was elected to run. I'm committed to finding the balance with the governor that is needed to move forward, but it's hard to work with him, let alone agree with him, when he's embarked on a scorched earth tour of Illinois, a tour, I would note, that began the morning of June 1st, a tour predicated on there being no agreement on the budget. You don't just throw a tour like that together overnight. It takes days of planning and coordination. So now, once again, for the second year in a row, I'm left wondering if the governor spent the final days of May focused on the budget, like we were, or if he was instead planning a campaign that relied upon there not being one. It's exactly where we were last year, when the governor spent the final weeks of session working on political ads that he was producing rather than the budget. So if he can just turn it off for a couple weeks, it would really help. There's a time to campaign, there's a time to govern. Right now we need a governor. We don't need Washington-style campaign tactics. The over-the-top rhetoric is distracting at best, hurtful at worst. It's not helpful to negotiate by insults. It's as if someone forgot to give the governor the interested parties memo. So we got an interested parties memo from Tim Newting, very well respected head of his budget. Used to be the chief of staff for Senate Republicans, great guy, knows Springfield. He sent an interesting parties memo out. I didn't get it, but I found it. And it's the basis for what these meetings are all about. That's what they're working off of. And the governor asked for that, and he asked for a standalone education bill. They're working on that too. So we're doing what he is asking for. I wonder maybe they didn't give him the memo. So to refresh your memory, guys, in 2009 I got elected Senate President. My top priority was ending the political acrimony that you may recall we had with Blagojevich and Emil Jones and Madigan. It had paralyzed the state. It was a goal shared by Republican leader Christine Radogno, and one we've been largely able to accomplish in the Senate. I'm not afraid that I get along with Christine Radogno. I like Christine Radogno. She's a good person. She's not corrupt. The Illinois Senate tackled huge issues, and usually we do it by working together. I'll give you some examples. The 2011 workers' compensation changes. She voted for it. Leader Durkin voted against it, just to prove how controversial it was. But we passed it. McCormick Place reforms. Marriage equality was a bipartisan bill. Immigrant driver's license was bipartisan. Through it all, nothing has been more important to me than working together in a civil, responsible manner. Maybe people have forgotten the dysfunction that occurred before 2009. I hadn't, and I'm committed to not letting it return. So I want to work with this governor, but that requires him to start working and stop campaigning. It's time for him to put down the keys to the campaign bus and join us in honest negotiations. With any luck, we can quickly see this agreement through, and he can get back to bad-mouthing me anytime he wants in the future. But what he's doing now isn't working, and that's unfortunate. Opportunities are being squandered, And I would urge everyone to rethink their agendas, find the common ground, and move forward. While the working group was discussing his proposal today, people are getting, like they do in my caucuses, they're reading their iPhones. And they see that the governor is blasting us while we're supposed to be cooperating with him in a bipartisan way to do what he asked us to do, after I had initially suggested it, by the way. So he's being very difficult to help us negotiate an agreement, and I would urge him to, once again, stop campaigning and start governing. Be happy to answer any questions.
One of the governor's arguments during the past few days has been that you, in particular, threatened to hold up school funding in order to get the funding.
Yeah. I went to the City Club. I gave a speech in early part of the session, and I pointed out, with a pretty extensive study, how we have the worst funding formula in the nation, by far, no dispute. And that if we continued to fund it, it was going to be very detrimental to our school system. The governor proposed a budget with 37% of the school districts in the state losing money, many of whom could not open. He then modified it to try to have those 37% be held harmless, but still, if we passed that budget, many school districts, not just Chicago, in Republican Senate districts would not open. I can't pass a bill like that. It's not a threat. He should not be accusing people of holding things hostage. And so my point is we have to work on a manner in which we can have a more equitable funding formula. The bill that the House passed that I negotiated with the Speaker did that. It put $760 million into education, many of which went into a poverty grant, which was directed towards poor school districts. That's the type of reform we would like, or even a permanent reform, a bill that Senate Bill 231, which we passed, it's over in the House, Senator Menard's bill, solves the problem permanently. So that's what I meant when I said that.
And what about pension pickups? Would that be in both the House and the Senate?
I don't think you mean pension pickup. Are you talking about pension parity?
Sure.
Okay, well, they're two different things.
Sorry. Is that something that's being discussed in working groups?
That would come under, arguably, a standalone education budget. And if you want me to make sure we're talking about the same thing, everybody in the state of Illinois, except for Chicago, has the state pay for its normal cost for its pensions. Chicago doesn't get that money. It's $205 million. We've passed it 4 times in the Senate. It's not an issue that anybody can even stand up and argue against. It's parity. It's equal. And that should be part of an education funding reform.
Mr. President, what is your view on the likelihood that most public schools in the state?
I didn't say most, because there is such a disparity in wealth between certain school districts. Some school districts have an enormous amount of reserves. So, for example, the governor had a press conference at Lyons Township. Senator Verdonio, Representative Durkin's district, they complained that changing the formula, after 4 years, they lose $1.9 million a year. They have $67 million in reserves. It would take 34 years to go through that. So I think they might be able to open using their reserves, but many school districts, primarily in southern Illinois, central Illinois, represented by Republican senators, in addition to Chicago, would not be able to open unless we do something different.
So is it your view that that can be avoided, or is it likely that that's going to happen before
No. The governor called for a standalone education bill. We're negotiating that, and we'd be happy to do so. But it's going to result. That's not true. He passed the bill out of the House that puts $760 million into a fund, an equity, called an equity fund. 500 million or 700 million of which is directed to the poverty grant, and the other 60 million to make sure that nobody, even under Rauner's budget, even the rich districts, don't get less than last year. So that's what we're talking about. It's going to require more money. We want to spend more money on education. He doesn't. I don't think that's the message that the governor wants to send. So I hope I answered your question. Well, I don't want the schools to close to get to that deal. I want him to stop campaigning and come to these, stop distracting the meetings that he set up with his own staff so that the legislators who are working there can come to an agreement.
Can you respond directly to his charge that the speaker are slow walking the process to create a crisis that this is?
Yeah. You have to cross-examine him. They were meeting on this floor up until a few minutes ago, being distracted by his press conference. We're not slow-walking anything. We have passed education reform bills. He's been the governor for 18 months. Where is his education reform bill? Yeah, go ahead. They're not getting called. Do you know the Constitution actually requires a bill to be read 3 times before you can vote on it? You might know that. Maybe he doesn't. We're using those bills. We got them the last day. We're using those bills as the basis for the negotiations. If we get a deal, we'll go to Springfield and we'll vote on it. We'll have a bipartisan kumbaya, and we'll have 36 votes in the Senate for it.
President Cullerton, can you pass an education funding bill that does not include extra money for Chicago? In other words, no matter what, Chicago will have more funding than it had last year.
Every school, under our proposals, will have as much as they had last year, and all the poorer schools will get more. That's what has to happen. We have the worst funding formula in the nation. There's no question about it. It's embarrassing. We've passed the bill 2 years ago to try to change it. We're trying to bring attention to this. This is something that can be fixed right now. But if we can't pass a permanent fix to the funding formula, we have to do it at least for next year.
But the bottom line is Chicago CPS has $1 billion deficit. They need more money than they got.
You know what? Let me explain that the focus has not been exclusively on Chicago. These bills that we're talking about help the whole state. Now, there's 2 things that need to be done for Chicago that are unique to Chicago. Chicago has asked for the city council to have the opportunity to vote on whether there should be a property tax increase. We passed that in the Senate. It hasn't passed the House. We would ask for the governor's support on that. And we want pension parity, equality. After you do those 2 things, nothing special for Chicago. So just pass a bill that focuses money where there's a concentration of poverty. That's the weakness in our school funding formula. Every other state, that's the main factor. For us, it's not. Yes, ma'am. Well, I don't know what that's what the executive branch does, sell bonds. I don't know what the purpose of the bonds are. I do know that the governor wanted to be business friendly, and as a result, though, when we get downgraded, as we have, that's not being very business friendly. Running up deficits, as we have since he's been the governor, is not good business practices. So that's my response. What's behind it? It's been the fundamental, it hasn't changed from the beginning. The governor asked for, in his view, his turnaround agenda, and he felt that we could literally not have a complete budget until he got the turnaround. He now has modified his position, which is very significant, which he said on the last day of session, that he is willing to put the turnaround agenda aside and work and tax increases implicitly as well, and work on a temporary budget for human services and for higher ed, and to open a year-round budget for what we call P12, or the grammar schools and high schools. And that's very significant. So we now are in those negotiations while he's having distracting news conferences with wild rhetoric. My purpose today is to ask him to please stop doing that, take a couple weeks off, let's get a deal, and then he can go back to what he wants to do. I just told you there's three parts. It's not a bailout to let the city council vote on a property tax increase. I'm going to define it for you. I have no idea if he knows what he's talking about when he says that word. Okay? Number two, pension parity. You can't argue against it. In fact, you could even go further and say, not only are we paying the normal cost for the downstate and suburban districts, but we're also paying the legacy cost, the cost that is to make up for the past underfunding. We're not even asking for that because the Chicago public school pension system is better funded than the suburban and downstate. So we're just asking for parity. After we get those two things for Chicago, then we're asking for a formula that's a statewide formula with no special deals. So there is, it's just, that's what it is. That's what we're asking for. It's hard to argue against that. So they have to misrepresent it.
What's the likeliest outcome in the near future? Is it going to be a standalone education bill? Is it going to be a temporary budget, which we thought we might get the governor signed by this week? Is it going to be a full-on budget? What's the likelihood?
The first two.
A standalone education bill and a temporary budget. You feel confident?
Yeah, it's a 6-month budget. It gets past the election, gets into the point in the session when you need a majority vote to pass legislation. We have to keep the universities open, otherwise some will close. They've already been adversely affected by the budget impasse. And there's human service providers that are not being covered by court orders that are going to go out of business unless we pass. And there's appropriation authority for operations of state government that the governor has asked for. Those things, along with a year-round budget. You have to have a year-round budget for P-12 because you have to hire teachers for the whole year. And they have no other source of revenue. They were meeting today when they got distracted by the governor's press conference. That's why I'm here. Okay? Am I coming through here?
How was the meeting before that?
I wasn't in it. You can talk to some of the members. I just heard about the distraction. No, I think that there's progress to be made. You don't have the distraction of these turnaround agenda items. You're not talking about voting for a tax increase. You're talking about a limited amount of money. If you read the memo, you guys got the memo before I did, the interested parties. You read the memo, they identify a certain amount of dollars that they can spend. That is the Republicans. And that's what they're willing to spend. When it comes to education, the governor's made a counteroffer. It's not enough money. So we're going to have to spend more money on education. And we can negotiate how much that should be.
Can you give us a timeline for getting a deal on the 31st? Late that night?
I said it was a week and the week's up, so I better not do that anymore. It depends on how many interruptions we're going to get from the governor. No, they're going to pay their pension payment. They're going to pay that. It's after that they would have trouble opening. We come back to Springfield when there's something to vote on. I mean, remember the Blagojevich years with the special sessions and all that? It's bad enough down there just to have people go down and stand around. We come around when we have a deal, and we have rank and file members are negotiating. Leaders can negotiate. We have caucuses then when we explain it to the members, and then we ask people to vote. That's the way, the most responsible way of doing it.
Should the legislative leaders meet with the governor again while the talks continue in the working group? Would that be productive given all the new developments and the campaign?
Yeah, I'm willing to meet with the leaders for sure, and I think that would be helpful as well. I was relying upon, last time we met, we said, we all agreed that we'd have our representatives and the governor's staff meet in these working groups. And again, they may be able to make progress. It's the behavior of the governor the day after he suggested that we do that that's been so distracting. And that's what I'm suggesting to the governor, take a break until we can get an agreement. Okay, thanks guys. What's up?
Next, from Springfield, we attend a press conference where the head of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce is joined by representatives of the transportation industry as they discuss the negative effects the budget impasse has had on Illinois' transportation infrastructure. This runs about 30 minutes.
Hello, my name is Todd Meisch. I'm President and CEO of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. I'm also co-chair of the Transportation for Illinois Coalition, and I'm here with other coalition members. TFIC is really the leading advocate for investment in our vital infrastructure, transportation-related infrastructure in the state of Illinois, so I'm very proud to head up this group and be joined by these austere gentlemen here today and really the entire coalition. So we are here today to make a strong call for a stopgap budget funding measure that fully funds transportation investments in the next fiscal year. As we all know, that the budget impasse has really put all sorts of funding at risk, but transportation is unique in that we are very, very time sensitive, even more so, I would say, than education, which has gotten an awful lot of attention. So we think that transportation should be taken care of. Other spending plans should also be on the table as well, but transportation is very, very much at risk and needs to be at the forefront of discussion about a stopgap funding measure that we hope that the legislature will come back, work with the governor, and get completed here, and we're all in agreement that we want to go ahead and see that funding. Businesses, I think we all know how important transportation is and how much of our economy is dependent upon our vital transportation infrastructure. We've got thousands of jobs that have just been announced, especially just out of even one company like Amazon, and they're here for distribution. They were very impressed by our system that we have here that allows them to get to 1 hour delivery and move their goods other places, yet that system is very much at risk. I would point out that for the very first time that we know of, the condition of roads that are acceptable has fallen below 80%. Now it's 79%. And if you don't fund transportation on a timely basis, you risk losing an entire construction season. And think about that. An entire construction season can be lost because of the weather if we don't go ahead and get something passed by July 1st. So what does 79% look like after losing the entire construction season, no maintenance, no expansion at all? We think that the roads are already very ragged now and that citizens across the state are going to realize that their road system is crumbling if we lose an entire construction season. So we think that's very, very important. We want to make sure that the legislature and the governor put transportation in the very top tier of priorities as they discuss a resolution, even if it's a temporary resolution to this budget problem. It's very important that $1.8 billion that was announced gets taken care of. We need a longer term solution, no doubt about it. We need a major investment to keep our systems going, so we need a new capital bill. But in the meantime, while the budget impasse is going, we just want to make sure the legislature and the governor are focused on not losing an entire construction season. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my TFIC co-chair, Michael Kleinek.
Thanks, Todd. My name is Michael Kleinek. I'm the executive director with the Chicago Labor's District Council, LMCC. I am the labor co-chair for Transportation for Illinois Coalition. TFIC estimates that Illinois is at risk if the 2016 road and infrastructure construction season due to the state's budget impasse. This would result in immediate loss of 25,000 middle-class jobs and cost the taxpayers approximately $3 million a day to keep motorists safe around the construction sites. So it's very important that if the middle class, if we don't have the jobs, then they can't purchase stuff in their area, and it's going to hurt the economy in the state of Illinois. I'd like to, with that, turn it over to Bill Fry with the AGCI to give a perspective on the local impact.
Hi, my name is Bill Fry. I'm the Executive Director of the Associated General Contractors of Illinois, and indeed the local system is part of this dilemma too. That funding supports cities, townships, and counties, and they've had a much worse shortfall in funding on their end over the last 6 years. So that monies that are coming in for this summer are even more important to keep those systems functioning.
Good morning. My name's Don Schaefer. I'm Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association. Illinois' infrastructure, of course, is the backbone of Illinois' economy. Transportation, Distribution, and Logistics, TD&L, is the fastest growing segment of the Illinois economy. Without a strong infrastructure program, we cannot expand on both an economic and, in this situation, on a safety basis. You know, transportation funding is crucial. Both right now, we're talking short and long term. We're hoping that the leaders of the General Assembly and the executive leadership face a reality that we need the short-term funding. It's crucial right now, and even long-term, because we need to grow. We cannot fall behind. As you've heard already, the condition of Illinois roads are falling behind, and without a comprehensive program that guarantees funding for both short-term and long-term for our roads and bridges, it's just going to get worse. I'll turn it over to Matt Hart.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. Trucking in Illinois employs 279,000 people. That's 1 out of every 18 jobs. And we rely, of course, on highways to safely deliver the goods that consumers want. Our industry already pays $10,000 per truck per year in state user fees. We pay $9,000 per truck per year in federal user fees. It's very important that we have a robust and safe highway network out there for our members to use. We implore the leaders and the governor to pass a comprehensive solution to our transportation needs in Illinois so that we can continue to serve this state. Trucking delivers over 70%, or nearly 70% of the nation's freight. That's more than twice all the other modes combined. So that's how important trucking is to the state of Illinois. It's how important it is to the Chicagoland area and to all the areas of the country that we serve from Illinois. Also, we're imploring that the transportation solution also include funding for IFTA. IFTA is the International Fuel Tax Agreement. Right now, the state of Illinois has not been able to make payments to other states for IFTA. This is an interstate program where you collect motor fuel tax to pay that interstate trucking pays as they go from state to state to state. Right now, the state of Illinois owes over $9 million to the other IFTA jurisdictions. We also owe over $4 million to Illinois-based companies who have overpaid IFTA and have not been issued their refunds. It's money that the state of Illinois has collected but does not have the legal authority to make those payments. Of course, we also risk losing our status in IFTA because we haven't paid, and if the state of Illinois does not make their payments in IFTA, and if IFTA should happen to kick Illinois out of that program, that would be detrimental to the trucking industry because it would mean that every truck coming into the state of Illinois would have to get a permit, and every truck leaving the state of Illinois would also have to get a permit. And of course, those permits would have to be administered. This is something that's already done through IFTA. We haven't made our IFTA payments since the fiscal year began last July. So we're hopeful that we can get a solution that will allow us to come up to date with IFTA and keep trucking and freight moving throughout Illinois. Thank you very much.
So just to wrap up, I think that the IFTA issue is a great example of how there's money on hand and just the getting the legislature to act to do something so obviously important. Think about anybody who's been on I-80 knows the truck traffic on there. Having every single one of those trucks have to stop as they come in or as they leave is something that's truly amazing. So the other thing I'd point out is that a lot of this is federal money. This is money that we're entitled to, that we've come out of Washington, our leaders have gotten for us. It's a big, big part of our money is federal money, not even our state resources. We can't spend that federal money, and potentially it could be lost to other states if we were to not be able to spend the money that's been allocated to us. So there are a lot of good dot points there for folks that talk about what funds need to be allocated and the different points. So I think they did a good job of, I think materials really do a good job of pointing out the specific items that the legislature and the governor need to agree to go ahead and act on, and we act. And so we know what needs to be done. All there needs to be is the political will to realize what a terrible travesty it would be if we were not to get a construction season done here. The quality of the roads would plummet, jobs lost, and long-term devastating impact on the Illinois economy. So we need to go ahead and get something that's very simple, get it done by July 1st, and we're calling for a stopgap funding, as well as serious discussions on a long-term investment that is so much needed by the state. So with that, unless there's anything else people want to add, we'll go ahead and take questions.
$1.8 billion in federal money at risk.
That's the total program.
That's the total this year program.
Okay.
And as far as state money, road fund money doesn't need appropriation, does it?
Yes, it does, yes.
Appropriate each year? So there's no, without action, there's no construction at all.
Right.
But what would that look like? Do you have projects that are starting now that would stop on the 1st, or that wouldn't start after the 1st, or what would it look like?
Well, fortunately, we don't know for certain because it's not happened before. But I think that there are contingency plannings, and Bill's probably the best to speak to that. Long-time, great IDOT employee there. But yeah, you've got to start to set it down. You've got to mothball projects that are already in place. Now, I will tell you that we think that the IDOT has been proceeding as though they don't expect this to happen, and we're going to decide that that's a good sign, that there is will. But if it were, then yes, all the work that you see that's going on out on the highways right now you've got to find a way to mothball it, and that's obviously would be a terrible situation.
How'd the program go in FY16 without an appropriation?
No, the governor signed that. So there are two parts of the budget that the Democrats passed that the governor did sign. Initially, he signed education, which everybody knows about and talks about, but a little bit later, I think there was a little bit of a delay, he decided that, hey, not signing the transportation piece would be terrible. We wouldn't have had construction going on over the last 12 months. So he did sign it last time. I think given the opportunity, he would sign it again, but because education isn't yet resolved, I'm speaking only from the chamber here, I think politically a stopgap that includes education, transportation, and some of these operational things is what needs to happen if we can't get to a comprehensive deal here over the short term.
What happened to no budget without reforms? Why can't you just be along with the social services and universities that aren't getting funded? What's changed?
Well, I think that this is about economic development. This is about underpinnings of the economy. And if you have this kind of loss of jobs that we're talking about and the overall investment, then the overall economy gets hurt, and all those other people who are funded from taxes that are generated from economic opportunity, those folks are facing even worse long-term situations. So we think this is an immediate issue and one that should be taken care of right now.
It looks to me like you're backing off of no budget without reforms.
I'm not speaking for the administration or anybody else. We still want reforms, but we're here to talk about the immediate issue of transportation that's before us today.
Let me point out one other way where what you're saying is diverging from the message or non-message from the governor's office. Amazon, they're building facilities here. Whole Foods has built a facility in Illinois, moved here from Indiana of all places. You wouldn't know it from hearing from the governor's office or DCEO or the ILB EDC. They've hid that light under a bushel, or they think that it's not a light at all for whatever reason. They won't put out a news release or barely acknowledge it. So what gives?
I can't speak for the administration. I don't work for them, and I don't know. That's a question for them.
You know, it seems to me it's good news that they ought to be touting. For some reason, they're not. It must not be worth that much.
Like I said, I don't. You're going to have to ask the administration about that.
So, how many jobs again would actually be lost, and then if a funding bill came in, let's say August 1st instead of July 1st? Is it too late at that point?
There's some impact, there's no doubt about it. Again, Bill can probably talk to the logistics of it a little bit better than I can, but clearly we want to focus on a July 1st so you get the full $1.8 billion that's there and put those people to work and get those projects done. But clearly the longer it goes, the worse it gets. You know, again, just speaking for the chamber, as I size things up politically, the closer you get to the election, the more the momentum will be, the inertia will be greater and greater in erring to the side of doing nothing. So we really need to take advantage of these next few days to go ahead and get action done. If you get in, later you get, in my opinion, the more likely it is that this gets put off till November, and November you've lost the entire season.
Is there any, Bill, you want to talk on that issue? I mean, I never heard any numbers. What are we talking about? Would you go to the microphone?
Again, I'm Bill Fry with Associated General Contractors. Our large contractors can last longer in managing their cash flow. Who gets hurt first and possibly goes out of business are the small contractors and the minority contractors. So eventually the state stops paying without that appropriation. Then it's a question of how long a contractor can manage his cash flow until he has to pull the plug on a construction project, and he can no longer get loans from his bank. So it's a stagger as you go into the summer. You start losing some early, and then as the bigger jobs shut down from lack of payment, you're going to lose those a little later. But at the end of the day, it's up to the Illinois Department of Transportation on where that plug is pulled. It could be July 1st. They're probably making plans for how do you shut them all down because there's no way to make payments after July 1st. Whether that happens or not, they ask our contractors to carry that burden into part of July and maybe August 1st. We'll have to wait and see.
So this would be equivalent of a department store losing the Christmas season for road construction people to miss the summer season.
Excellent.
So if you miss it, even if funds come through retroactively at some point, I mean, aren't we going to drive a number of these people permanently out of business because they just won't have the ability to recoup?
Two things there. The funding's there. It's appropriation that's lacking. The motor fuel taxes have been paid. The federal government has the money for Illinois. The appropriation is what needs to be passed in order to keep these jobs going. And yes, you're exactly right with your analogy of going out of business. Sometimes they can't survive.
Are you saying FY17 projects have begun?
No.
Contracts have been let?
No. FY17 will start being let on the June letting, which is tomorrow.
And contractors will go ahead and
They
bid on
cannot
projects?
execute a June or a fiscal 17 contract till there's an appropriation.
And so the work that's being done now is leftover work? Does it not need reappropriation?
It needs reappropriation. It cannot be paid. Any work after July 1st cannot be paid for without a reappropriation of the fiscal $16.
So some of them are working for free right now?
Not yet. They will be July 1st.
But there's construction going on now.
Absolutely.
What is that?
That's all of the 16. Yeah, there's close to $2 billion in leftover projects from 15. They're still cleaning up some 15 work. You drive anywhere, you're going to see construction projects. They're in full swing. You got 12 hours, 13, 14 hours of daylight. This is the time to get work done in an efficient manner and make it more reasonable for our taxpayers. But yeah, we're just 20 days away.
How much does the state need to appropriate to get the federal money?
The full appropriation is $1.8 billion.
That was the full.
Yeah, that's for the full program. Yeah,
That's for the state?
that's for federal's funding probably about 80% of that.
Okay.
Or probably more now because the MFT motor fuel tax revenues have decreased so much.
Well, I'm sorry, 1.8 billion is the whole program for FY17?
That's correct.
And 80% of that is?
At least 80%, probably more, probably closer to 90, because of the declining revenues from our motor fuel tax.
Which illustrates, again, why we need a long-term solution for state resources. We're so almost totally dependent on federal money at this point.
So, so if you're saying that 80-90% of that is federal money, then the state only needs to appropriate 180 million?
No, even though it's pass-through money, you still have to have the okay to spend it, even if it's from a different source. The state legislature controls all the monies that come into Illinois from whatever source that is. So we still need their okay or their appropriation to spend those federal funds.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering what the split was.
On federal, typically over the life of the Illinois Department of Transportation, we always call it 80-20.
Okay.
I mean, but again, as we've fallen into dire straits on the transportation system here in Illinois, it's creeping up to 90-10.
Don Schaefer with the Midwest Truckers Association. You had just participated in the Transportation for Illinois Coalition, and we heard how construction could come to a grinding halt if spending authority is not passed in time for the July 1 new fiscal year. What other implications might there be besides just those who are operating on the construction projects currently who would lose those positions if we don't have a spending authority passed.
Well, really, you're looking at the trickle down. I mean, the trickle down means that not just the actual construction people on the job sites, but it goes way back. I mean, you've got, of course, you got the trucks thousands of trucks that are involved in the construction projects right now. But then it goes back even farther. The asphalt plants, the construction, the concrete batch plants, the quarries, the people people behind the scenes. I mean, we're talking, tens of thousands of people who are directly and indirectly impacted by what, could possibly be a shutdown of the construction season.
And your organization, Midwest Truckers, represents truckers from a number of different states throughout the Midwest. Is there are we going to be losing truckers from Illinois, just giving up on Illinois and moving to other states? Is there any more of that, or what implications might there be?
Well, we've seen that in the past. I think what we're seeing right now, though, is a fear that, all these trucks are out there. Their big jobs are to work on these construction jobs. A lot of them do it year-round. They'll be during the construction season. During the fall season, they may be stockpiling rock piles. They may be doing other things, in terms of getting, rock tar, that type of stuff, to the other plants in preparation for the construction season. And so it's a year-round, program in terms of keeping this system going. And, the scary part is that all of these companies are, they're there, but they live and die by the appropriation. The state doesn't appropriate, and then all of a sudden the trucking companies have to lay off. And when they do that, then, say the money comes back, a lot of times it's hard to get that money back, or not to get just the money back, but to get the people back to work too.
Yeah, they've had to go out and get another job. They moved on. Maybe they've even moved out of state, depending upon how long that takes. It could take 6 months, and that's the problem. If you're laid off, it'd be one thing if you knew it was going to be a week, or even if you knew it was going to be a month. But given that we didn't pass the budget last year, if they're let go, no one would be able to say for how long you're going to be let go.
Well, and the problem we've seen passed over the last decade or so is that because of the fact, really, in prior administrations also, things have been so unsettled that there has been this great fear that we wouldn't get an established program going. And because of that, a lot of people wouldn't make that commitment to say, hey, I'm going to buy more equipment to be able to do this work when the time comes, and or I'm going to hire more people in anticipation they're going to be able to bid these projects and to have the workforce and the equipment to be able to do the work. If you don't have that certainty of that, then a lot of companies are just saying, the heck with it. I'm not going to stick my neck out, hire more people, buy more equipment, investing millions of dollars for work that I don't know is going to be there.
And so, as you said already, it's just a ripple effect that's going to hit any number of people who are not directly tied to the construction of roads.
And there's a lot of uncertainty there also, because, I mean, we're looking, long range. We're looking not just right now, but we're looking down the road. The real issue out there is long-term funding also. We have to do something in terms of long-term funding. The mechanism we have in place right now, 25 years. We haven't, seen a motor fuel tax increase or another type of funding mechanism to get the money there to maybe build that additional lane of roadway we need, or to not just to resurface the road, but to totally rebuild the road that needs to be built. Money that come down to the locals. The locals need the money, just like everybody else. They have bridges that need a lot of work. So, combination of, this proposed constitutional amendment that'll be on the ballot in November, if we can dedicate the money to go for road construction and repair, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars a year that would be available if this constitutional amendment passes in the fall. Combine that also with some sort of another funding mechanism long-term to guarantee that we're going to have the money in place to build roads that we need. I mean, everyone will guarantee or will tell you right now they know our roads are not in the best shape. They could be in better shape, and the problem is that there's no funding to back it up and to guarantee that we can do a long-term commitment to doing more road program.
All right, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Matt Hart with the Illinois Truckers Association. Thanks for joining us. As you just participated in the Transportation for Illinois Coalition, trying to warn us about various maladies that will come if we don't pass a budget before July 1st, or at least the spending authority for federal funds. One of the points you were making concerned the International Fuel Tax Agreement Program that was referred to as IFTA. And what is that, and why would it matter if we don't have a budget by July 1?
Sure. And a lot of people don't know what IFTA is. IFTA is the International Fuel Tax Agreement. Unlike your automobile, where you drive across the country and you purchase fuel in different states, and the state then collects their motor fuel tax in those states, IFTA is a system for truck drivers to make sure that no state has any advantage over another state based on their fuel tax. And so it was to level the playing field state by state by state on fuel taxes. So for example, if you're an Illinois company and you, trucking company, and you spend 50% of your time in Illinois and 50% of your time in Indiana, to make sure that Indiana doesn't have an advantage of purchasing cheaper fuel over across the border, IFTA basically is a way for trucking companies to report the number of miles that they run, and then they pay an apportioned amount of tax based on their number of miles. So this trucking company based in Illinois with half their time in Indiana, half their time in Illinois, doesn't matter where they buy their fuel, they're going to fill out a report every quarter that says 50% of my miles were in Indiana and 50% were in Illinois, and I'm going to pay 50% of my fuel tax for Indiana and 50% of my fuel tax for Illinois. And that's apportioned state by state by state based on the number of miles that you run. And trucking companies pay that quarterly, file that quarterly, and it's a network that the lower 48 states all participate in, so that you don't have to get a fuel permit when you go from Illinois to Indiana or from Indiana to Ohio, as we did many decades ago. The problem that we are facing today in Illinois under IFTA is that the state of Illinois, which is a member of IFTA, the International Fuel Tax Agreement, has been collecting money for IFTA. And it's money that trucking companies in Wyoming and trucking companies in Ohio and trucking companies in Wisconsin, when they cross through Illinois and they have filled out their quarterly reports and have said, I've run miles in Illinois and I need to pay my Illinois fuel tax, and some of that tax has been collected by the state of Illinois that is due back to the other states and the jurisdictions. Because Illinois hasn't had the legal appropriations authority since July 1, 2015, we haven't made any payments to any of those member states. And so you've got 47 other states with their hand open saying, wait a second, state of Illinois, we've been paying you, but you haven't been returning any of our IFTA money that is due back to our carriers. And right now the Illinois Department of Revenue says that figure's over $9 million is what we owe to other states in the IFTA system. Our concern at the Illinois Trucking Association is that IFTA eventually is going to get tired of not getting their payments, is going to tell Illinois, listen, you haven't paid up, so we're going to kick you out of the International Fuel Tax Agreement. If that occurs, then every truck coming into the state of Illinois would have to purchase a fuel permit. And every Illinois-based carrier that leaves the state to do business would then have to buy a fuel permit in those other jurisdictions if we're no longer part of IFTA. And that's our largest concern, is that would create what we believe would be utter chaos in the trucking industry because so much interstate trucking occurs in and around the state of Illinois.
Yeah, and that's, this is something that we as Americans just take for granted, that we can go from one state to the next and, you don't have to have a passport. To use that as an analogy, if the Illinois truckers had to be getting a fuel certificate or permit in every state, it's almost the equivalent of if we as a citizen had to have a passport every time we left Illinois to go to some other state. It just becomes bureaucratically a nightmare.
Exactly. I mean, imagine the next time you go on a family vacation, you say you drive from Illinois to Florida and you go through Kentucky and Tennessee and Georgia and Florida. Imagine having to stop at every single state and get a permit so that you can purchase fuel and pay their fuel tax in each one of those states. And that's what IFTA, the solution that IFTA provided is that it provided a place to where truckers didn't have to get permits state by state by state. And it's a system that's been operating for decades. But we run the risk of being kicked out of IFTA if we're not living up to our obligation to IFTA. And right now, legally, we don't have the authority to live up to our obligation to IFTA. And that's what concerns us at the Illinois Trucking Association.
Aside from the permitting, does it also mean Illinois wouldn't be getting some of these monies, and these are federal dollars, I guess, are they not? Am I saying that wrong?
They're not federal dollars. They're dollars that trucking companies pay for fuel that are collected in the other states, and then they all go through. There's the International Fuel Tax Agreement system. It funnels back to the states based on the quarterly reports that trucking companies provide, where that money should go. And even the one other risk we have too is that right now we have several Illinois-based trucking companies that are issued refunds due to them through IFTA. And again, we don't have legal authority to make those payments as well. That's over $4 million that we owe our own Illinois-based trucking companies.
We the state of Illinois.
The state of Illinois. These are quarterly reports that were filled out last September, filled out last December, filled out this spring, where we've said, we the trucking company have traveled these different states and we've overpaid for fuel, and we should be given a refund based on the taxes that we've overpaid. And the state of Illinois owes over $4 million to Illinois-based carriers, in IFTA-based carriers as well.
How many carriers are there in Illinois?
There's roughly about 26,000 trucking companies total in the state of Illinois.
Well, we, for everyone's sake, hope a budget deal is reached, and we appreciate you for joining us.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Phil Garnett, President of the Illinois Coal Association. Illinois is blessed with an abundance of coal. In fact, coal lies under 65% of Illinois land, and coal is used to provide half of the nation's energy needs, abundant and domestic. With energy independence at the top of our national agenda, Illinois coal mines, like the one here in Williamsville, must be part of our national discussion on energy. That's why the Illinois Coal Association supports the work of the Illinois Channel. Their extensive coverage of the role Illinois coal plays in meeting America's energy needs is a valuable contribution to informed discussion on a serious issue, such as the Illinois Channel's coverage of the FutureGen project, which holds a promise of environmentally friendly use of coal, or the Illinois Channel's unedited, in-depth interview with Fred Palmer of Peabody Energy. Serious coverage of serious issues. That's the Illinois Channel. You keep up the good work, and we'll keep watching.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Darren Root, the superintendent of the Auburn School District, and Mike Tomlinson, a consultant for the Champaign and Ford County School Districts, about Senate Bill 100, which would establish specific guidelines for school discipline. This runs about 25 minutes.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. We wanted to talk to you about SB 100, which is a bill that passed last year, and addresses some of the issues of discipline in the classroom and how that should be handled. And Joe, you are a consultant. Give us, if you will, first of all, kind of the big picture view. What does this bill do, and what problem is it trying to address?
Well, Senate Bill 100 was passed to look at a different mindset in administering discipline in the school districts. In the past, probably the mindset has been more punitive, exclusion from school. And today, as a result of the Senate Bill 100, we're looking at more restorative mindset of what can teachers, administrators do to keep the kids in school and not suspend or expel to the degree that we have in the past.
And right at one of the issues was that there was just not enough of an established order, so that there was no consistency in applying discipline from one school to the next, or maybe from one teacher to the next.
Well, there was somewhat consistency in that one of the things that is left in the bill is zero tolerance, so which means that if you and I are in a fight, we both got the same amount out and we both got the same discipline. Now we're looking at it on a case-by-case basis, and that each is an individual based on behavior, based on background, based on grades, based on many things. What led to this? In other words, were complaints coming from family members whose child was disciplined and they said it was applied in an unfair and unequal way? The impetus came from Chicago, from a group of students, VOYCE, Voice of Youth in Chicago Education, who had done research and provided it for a senator, Senator Lightford, who took the impetus to take this to the General Assembly and the House and Senate and all that. And it was passed through there, sent to our administrators, and at the outset, the administration, IASA, Illinois Association of School Administrators, and also Illinois Principals Association, did not agree with it at first. But through rewrites and other kinds of things, came to at least on a non-negative plateau where they would at least accept it, and now it's been, of course, enacted as a bill and starts September 15th of next year. And Superintendent Root, let me touch base with you because Mr. Tomlinson here touched on one of the issues. Is this something for those who are operating schools that's being, so to speak, shoved down your throat, or is this something that you welcome?
Well, we do have a lot of things that are shoved down our throat, but this is really well intended, and schools that are doing the right thing with discipline shouldn't be impacted too much because it does talk about the accountability piece. It talks about doing what's best for the students, and that's really what it's all about. We have to remember that when students or use any other sort of discipline, the ultimate goal is to alter their behavior. And the only problem that most school districts, I think, are dealing with is that when one situation happens in one piece of the state and there's a shotgun approach to solve it, then we are basically losing local control. In my school district, it's relatively small, and most of the parents I know, the kids I know, and what may work for one student may not work for the other student. Sometimes a phone call at home is the best answer. And you work closely with the parents. So that's basically the one thing that I think is the most important piece to understand with this is that it's well intended, and we all have to make the best choices for our individual students, regardless of what how this is spelled out.
So specifically, what does this do? I mean, does it say you know, you get punished so much on the first incidence, on the second instance, on the third? Does it work in that form of a gradation of application?
Well, it gives you stair-step approach of accountability. A student shouldn't just all of a sudden be suspended as your first piece of discipline.
Had that happened in the past?
Not always. I'm sure it does at some school districts, which is why we have this in place.
And let me interject. Yeah. Why you have it in place, because in one school district, discipline would be applied one way, in a different school district a different way. It was all kind of left up to the local administrators. So just to make sure we're following as the viewers, is this then applying a uniform code across the state on how discipline issues should be addressed?
It has some uniformity to it now, because there is some professional discretion that has taken place and should take place, which is why some districts are having a hard time with it. But it is uniform. It is well intended so that the students' rights are also addressed, and I think that's the biggest piece. And if school districts are doing that anyway, this should not be a huge adjustment.
The problem, you tell me, Mr. Thomas, the problem is that not all students might be created equal, but not all parents are created equal. And the environment from an Auburn school is going to be entirely different than one in East St. Louis or the south side of Chicago, where there's going to be much more levels of poverty. How does this legislation address the differences of one district to the next? And I think it was designed to look at it from not just a minority or a majority viewpoint. It's designed to look at it from a minority as well as socioeconomic viewpoint. Where did the kids come from? What's the best for this district? And as he said earlier, it's an individual thing from the standpoint of each district's makeup. When we teach these classes, we teach mainly teachers to start looking at it totally differently in a restorative way, which means how can we make this kid or have this kid come out of this feeling good about themselves, yet still have a discipline tied to it. And so that's tough because we've, over the past, had a punitive mindset in a lot of school districts. And so that's a complete turnaround for the thinking is looking at a situation. And we started out today with a very example where two kids get into a fight, one from maybe a low socioeconomic background, one from a high, good grades, etc. Each will be taken on its own merit, and each will be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and then the appropriate discipline applied.
In talking with educators over the years, one of the things that people will tell me off camera is the discipline problems they have. And too many times the only issue we hear on camera or among our public officials is that we need to spend more money on education, and never taking into account the lack of discipline that is happening in some classrooms in some school districts. I have often said in talking with school teachers, and what they've told me is you could spend $100,000 a year per pupil, not an education environment that people can learn in, if you don't have discipline in the classroom. Will this, in your estimation, get us to where we need to be on that?
I think in some cases I don't know that it'll get us to the utopia that we all hope for, but what I think it will do is make it more understandable for parents and teachers about what we want, where we want this to go, and how we want kids to turn out. There's no question there's been a frustrating thing for classroom teachers and for administrators in terms of trying to do things. Pouring more money into it probably hasn't done any more than anything else. So they're asking us to look at it from the terms of a mindset, and asking us to look at it totally differently than what we have in the past. So I think from that standpoint, understanding, if I'm a white teacher and come from a pretty, middle class background, and I don't have an understanding of where either the low socioeconomic white student or African American or Hispanic come from, then it's very difficult for me. I jump at the first thing to get them out of school rather than to figure out where's this coming from and how can we keep them in school.
So does this empower the teacher? I've had some teachers, again, in the past tell me that they don't feel like administration backs them up, that they try to send a kid out and they don't want to deal with it, and they bring this troublemaker back into the classroom. Is that going to change that? Is that going to can we get the troublemakers out of the classroom faster? Or is this going to prolong the process before you can get those kids out? And maybe it's counter to having a good educational environment in the classroom.
But we have to remember, too, that the goal of the school district is to educate kids. It's not to administer justice. And I think a lot of people get that mixed up. Even sometimes staff feel like there's some justice that has to be administered when there's students that misbehave. They're kids. They will misbehave, but it's our job to make sure that they're educated regardless if they follow the rules or don't follow the rules. And there's many things, other tools in the toolbox besides suspensions that can happen. This just really focuses on the suspensions.
What kind of disciplines, Ken? You had talked about the stair step. What are some of the steps that go from A to Z?
Well, when you address the discipline problems in the classroom, instead of jumping to a suspension, there's all sorts of interventions that we have that can take place depending on the age of the students and the maturity level of the students. Of course, at the grade school, there are things that the students want, such as recess, or if you isolate them at lunch or things like that. Just connecting with the students and having positive reinforcement, reinforcing what's good instead of putting attention on the things that they struggle with and behaviors that they struggle with. I think really that's what gets to the soul of the problem here. When we have school districts that really struggle with discipline issues and they're only falling back on suspensions and excluding students from their educational rights, that's when we have problems. And I think that this kind of addresses this issue, so we're not jumping to suspensions. So we are dealing with these students, and they realize that they are wanted in the school. They're not wanted. We don't want to exclude any student, and our main goal is to educate them, not to discipline them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, and the shame is that, as I say, none of us got to pick our parents. No. And there's a wide discrepancy. Some parents are very involved in their children's education, some are not involved at all. I don't know that this is ever going to address that, or that even schools can address that, but at some point, if someone is disruptive to the entire environment of learning, as you say, you're there to educate, after a while you're going to have to get rid of the bad apples, right?
Well, we have to remember, too, suspensions is for the good of everybody else in the school. A lot of people think that you suspend a student because it's what's best for that student. That's not the case. By the time you exclude a student from an educational environment, it's because you have all these other students that need to have a little breather to have time to learn. It's a little timeout period. And so, Senate Bill 100 really addresses this and makes some of these requirements mandatory so that all the administrators have to think about what's important.
Do you, as a superintendent, and you had mentioned earlier, it was mentioned that the principals were initially against this, that you as an organization, not as an individual, have had enough input in this and that your concerns were listened to?
It's always good to be on the front end of conversations. We're not always on the front end of conversations, but that's okay. That's not the way the system is. The administrators in my district have embraced this. They don't see it as something that is, a negative change. And one reason is because they're confident in their jobs and what they're doing. They're making the good decisions now, and that's really what this is about.
Mr. Tomlinson, I would say everyone, in one way or another, or by and large the population, is engaged in education in that they have they're paying for it, and that a lot of them have kids in the process or had kids in the process. To what extent has the educational environment changed over the last 40 years? And what I'm getting at is a lot of people who are adults now, who are parents, they extrapolate their experience in the classroom from the 1960s or 70s as if it's the same today. And how much of a gap is there between what we as parents imagine is happening in schools versus what the reality is?
Well, as I said in our workshop today, we began probably 30 or 40 years ago with corporal punishment, and everybody knew what that was. And in some cases, we probably did have some good schools in the process. And then we went to exclusion or alternative types of punishment, and then we went to exclusionary, which means out-of-school suspensions. Research has shown through the VOICE, Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, that that's not working, that the data is there, that it's not driving down suspensions, it's not causing there to be less fights, there's not less disturbance. What I would say at this point is that there's a couple of things that should parents a safer feeling, and that is that if weapons are brought in, if drugs sale beyond or drug distribution beyond a certain amount, they still have the opportunity to exclude them from school, even up to and including expulsion. So that's still not taken away. That's still under their purview. So I think it's a mass change from where we were 40 years ago to corporal punishment to today, where we're looking at positive ways to discuss and relate to students. Also, parents have the option to now, in this law, come in, or not the option, they're required to come in and have a reentry conference after a suspension, which means that the administrator, if there's a teacher involved, the student will be there, and so that everybody knows what's expected and a plan developed, a positive plan for going forward. And that's for all kids. That's just not for, any individual kid, so they must do that.
Does this apply any greater responsibility one way or another on parents?
It does. As I said this morning, I'm not sure, but they had talked about making it some kind of violation for parents if they don't show up for this. I don't know how you'd police that or whatever, but it's certainly a requirement in the law that parents come for the reentry conference.
Is this going to cause school districts to spend a lot more money? Are there going to be legal fees attached to this and challenges in court where all of a sudden the classrooms become a litigious environment instead of an educational environment?
We've been that pretty much for the last few years anyway, so that's not something that, but I think there will be cases on this. We talked this morning about that some of the cases will be about the rights of kids, whether it was applied evenly and fairly from student to student, whether the number of days suspended out was appropriate. So that's why parents have this opportunity to come in and appeal it if they want, and have a hearing with a hearing officer. And they've always had that. It's just now they're going to know it more, and be able to use that as a tool.
Before I let you, on the implementation, where does it stand? When does it become fully implemented at one point, or is it?
The law says September 15th of 2016, which is this September, but what we're advocating is that policy be passed that school start at the first day of school, so that you don't have one implementation on August 25th or whatever and another one on September 16th.
Which is a good transition to the last part I was going to say. Just let's say, aside from the discipline issue, let's go to, for a minute, the funding. Right now, as everyone knows, the budget wasn't passed last year with the exception of K-12 education was signed into law. This year, Senate Democrats at least are threatening not to have any funding for the schools unless their reforms, promoted primarily by Senator Menard, are implemented. What does that do for you as a superintendent? What are your thoughts about this?
Well, of course, you know, the state's in a terrible financial situation now, and we are about % dependent on the state. It's an awful position to be in. Of course, you have two sets of revenue. The local property taxes is what is the revenue is based on, which is the other 50% of our revenue. The biggest problem is that they're looking also at a local property tax freeze. I know it's a very popular piece for votes, but those are really our only two sources of revenue. If you freeze your local property taxes and you take away your general state aid, there are school districts that can't function for much longer. Some may not be able to open up at the beginning of the school year because of it. It's very difficult to move forward. I think that some of these proposals about redistributing the revenue that's already there kind of misses the point a little bit. It's a little distracting. The bigger picture is the big revenue piece altogether. We need more money. No one wants to talk about more taxes. Nobody wants to talk about re-amortizing the debt or the real solutions. Some of these proposals, like Bill 231, talks a little bit about basically taking from poor districts and giving it to the poorer districts, and it's not fulfilling the total obligation by the state. We've had late payments. You have proration of general state aid. You also have an old foundation level, a formula that hasn't been moved since 2009. You can't run a household if you don't have the revenue. School districts have cut beyond what is even fathomable. If you still have places to cut, you're not running it efficiently in the first place. We don't have anything left to cut. I have a school district with fewer than 200 employees, and in my 4 years, I've cut 38 positions. It's pretty substantial, and we're pretty bare bones. So this battle that's going on in Springfield right now is more serious, I think, than most people think. They drive by schools, the lights are on, the buses still run. But if the state doesn't come through with their payments and the bills can't be paid, we're looking at real serious conversations about closing school districts or not opening the doors when school starts. Every school district has a little bit different situation with their fund balances, with when their local property taxes come in. And so every school district would have a different scenario, maybe their debt limit and how much they can borrow. But the bottom line is that the legislators in Springfield have to look at the overall picture and the amount of money that's coming in that is needed to continue the educational institutions in the state.
Joe, I don't know, is that an area that you get into?
No, it's not mine.
I don't want to.
Mine's more human resources and training.
And so to that end, what are you as a superintendent on the timeline? What are you doing now? And what I'm getting at is we should have already had a budget in place. We don't. And so you're going to have to probably delay making some decisions because you don't know how much you're going to get and when it's going to come. When do you just start driving through red lights, so to speak, and to where all of a sudden it becomes a train wreck because you just weren't able to make those decisions you should have made in a more timely fashion, so that even if they pass a budget by July 1st or July 15th, at what point does it become almost too late to start school on time?
School districts are faced with these financial problems now. For example, in my school district, it costs us about $1 million a month to run the district. With our local revenue that comes in and you look at your current fund balance, you just do the math and see how long you can last without any state revenue. And it's going to land differently for every school. A lot of schools, I would be surprised if they would make it through Christmas with no more revenue from the state. So it's a serious thing, and I just hope that the smart people in Springfield can get this figured out.
Last question, and because again we could talk all day in these issues there, but you're a superintendent. Auburn, for those who don't know, be watching from the Chicagoland and others, is a relatively small community. We might say a bedroom community of Springfield, about 20 miles or so south of Springfield. So you're one of the areas that Senator Menor would talk about. He would say that in those rural districts where there's not a lot of commercial property to tax, or in low property value districts such as in East St. Louis or the South Side Chicago, you're just not going to be generating, taxing the way we're taxing, enough revenue to really get the job done, and that education shouldn't be based upon the zip code that you happen to be born into. Is he right on that as one who has a superintendent of a relatively rural area?
Yeah, that's what general state aid is supposed to do. It's supposed to make up the difference for those that cannot generate enough local revenue. So the whole idea of this cost shift to the local taxpayers isn't reasonable, because the revenue is just not there. So the other problem, I think, with these proposals is that it loses sight of the main piece, that we don't have the revenue coming in. And what would scare me more about some of these passing, not that there's good pieces in them, it's that there would be a mentality that the problem's fixed. It's not fixed. It's bigger than just trying to get a budget passed for this year to keep the doors open this year. The way schools are funded are broken, and there's a much bigger piece that needs to be addressed.
What amongst, such as?
Well, a lot of proposals that are out there talk about not relying on property taxes at all. This is the main structure. I don't have the solution, or I wouldn't be standing here. But I do know that the way that it's set up now, when the state started out making late payments, that they counted as the first payment of the next year, which was really the last payment of the prior year. And then the foundation level in the formula that was frozen since 2009. And then the proration on an old foundation level. I mean, we are millions and millions of dollars behind from previous years. So trying to get to the current level, here we're celebrating when they can prorate on an old foundation level at 91 or 92%. We're still losing that revenue.
I'll ask you one more question, just because you kind of led to some. The governor is saying, now for the viewers, the foundation level is supposed to be $6,119 a year per pupil, but the state hasn't. I don't like the word proration, it's a cut. The state's been spending less than the $6,119, so it's an oxymoron to say that is a foundation level, because we're below that level. I think last year or so it was about 89% of that level of spending. The governor is saying, let's get up to where we're fully funding the foundation level at the $6,119. And it's going to, and we'll spend the next year working on restructuring the formula. Again, the Senate Democrats at this point are kind of saying, no, we've spent nearly 20 years with a bad system, no point in going forward. Where do you as an educator fall within that bookends of the discussion?
Well, most school districts in my area will cost between $8,000 to $9,000 per student per year. So the foundation level is way behind as it is. So the best case scenario under that proposal is still a disaster. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, should we try to figure it out, given that maybe one more year? And I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to suggest an answer here. I'm just asking. Or would you say it's best that we don't have schools open on time if we can fix the funding formula, and that we open in October if we have to?
No, the absolute goal is to open on time. I don't think there's anybody who wants to use that as a political leverage. There's nobody who wants to put the students out there as a political piece. The goal for Auburn and the goal for all the schools, I'm sure, is to provide the education no matter how we can get our hands on the resources.
All right, well, gentlemen, we appreciate your time, and maybe we can follow up again with you.
All right, thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.